If you think you can manipulate our destiny, you are mistaken. Burkina Faso is no longer anyone's backyard. Every attempt at destabilization only strengthens our determination to build a truly free country. The time for external interventions is over, not only for us, but for the whole of Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, in a speech broadcast on state television after the failed coup attempt. Ouagadougou. The sun had not yet risen over the horizon when thousands of Burkinabes began converging on the Place de la République. At around 3 a.m., the first groups were already organizing on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, carrying homemade banners and singing revolutionary songs that harked back to the era of Thomas Sankara, the leader assassinated in 1987, whose legacy Traoré claims. We traveled 320 kilometers from Ouagadougou. We left last night and walked for hours to show our support for the captain, explains Moussa Ouagadougou, a 47-year-old farmer, his face drawn with fatigue and emotion. We are not here because someone paid us or forced us. We are here because, for the first time in decades, we have a leader who does not bow down to the French. By 5 a.m., caravans of protesters from the outskirts of Ouagadougou were already forming lines that stretched for miles. Trucks full of young people, many wearing T-shirts with Traoré's image, were arriving constantly, parking on the streets adjacent to the central square. Within hours, what began as an organized rally had turned into the largest political mobilization in Burkina Faso's recent history. According to estimates by the Interior Ministry, more than 2 million people took to the streets of the capital, representing approximately 10% of the country's total population. The figure, disputed by Western observers as exaggerated, was confirmed by teams of independent journalists who flew over the city center using drones. The magnitude of the demonstration surprised even the organizers. Aboubacar Traoré, no relation to the captain, executive secretary of the National Coordination of the Civil Vigil, revealed to our team that the initial expectations were to gather around 500,000 people. What we saw today was a spontaneous explosion of patriotic feeling, he said, visibly moved. It is the definitive proof that the revolution is alive in the hearts of the people. The protesters, many of whom had traveled for days from remote parts of the country, formed an impressive mosaic of people that brought the center of the capital to a standstill. Businesses closed, traffic was halted, and the government declared a national holiday to allow people to participate. The central square, informally renamed Place de la Révolution by Traoré's supporters, was overflowing with people as far as the eye could see. Entire families camped out in small spaces, sharing food and water. Groups of women in traditional costumes danced to gems, while young university students handed out pamphlets explaining the government's recent economic reforms. What we are seeing here is not just a demonstration, it is a declaration of national sovereignty. Jean-Baptiste Ouagadougou, a political science professor at the University of Ouagadougou, who was watching the event from a nearby cafe, told our team, "People are tired of seeing foreign powers determining who should govern their country. These people are not in the streets out of coercion, but out of conviction. It is a mistake to interpret this as simple manipulation of the masses, as many Western analysts do." The images that reached the centers of power in Washington and Paris were striking. A sea of red, green, and yellow, the national colors, completely dominating the center of the capital. Drones operated by international television channels captured scenes that immediately went viral on social media and were broadcast in real time by channels such as Al Jazeera, RT, and CGTN. Banners with blunt messages in French and English called for an end to Western interference and declared unconditional support for Mr. Traoré's government, whose popularity has soared after implementing nationalist policies to control natural resources. "France, take your hands off our gold," read one huge banner draped over a government building. "Africa united against neo-colonialism," proclaimed another, visible from several blocks away. Particularly striking was the image of hundreds of protesters symbolically burning copies of the military cooperation agreement between Burkina Faso and France, signed in 2018 and revoked by Traoré shortly after he came to power. The scene, broadcast live around the world, caused consternation in Paris, where the French president called an emergency meeting with his national security cabinet. The images from Ouagadougou are a public relations nightmare for the French government, said Claude Dumont, an expert on Franco-African relations and a columnist for Le Figaro. They completely contradict the official narrative that the French presence in Africa is welcome and beneficial to the local populations. At the epicenter of the demonstration, a makeshift stage served as a platform for community leaders, intellectuals, and representatives of social movements. The sound system, powered by portable generators, amplified the speakers' voices to the crowd that stretched for miles. "This is the true face of African democracy," said Thomas Sankara, a leader of the student movement and niece of a legendary revolutionary Thomas Sankara. Not the one imposed by Western textbooks, but the one born of the will of the people and the quest for national dignity. "We do not reject democracy. We reject the democratic farce that serves only to keep our country subject to foreign interests." His speech, interrupted frequently by deafening applause, culminated with a direct reference to Western attempts to destabilize the government. "Every time they try to overthrow our captain, we rise up stronger. Every failed plot is a victory for African sovereignty." Mamadou Cabra, a veteran of the War on Terror in the north of the country and current leader of the Association of Ex-Combatants, took the stage in full military uniform, drawing a standing ovation from the crowd. "I fought alongside French soldiers in Operation Barkhane. Do you know what I learned? That they never wanted to defeat terrorism. They just wanted to justify their permanent presence on our soil." His testimony, particularly damaging to the French narrative about its military intervention in the Sahel, was broadcast live on state television and quickly shared on platforms such as TikTok and YouTube, where it racked up millions of views in just a few hours. During the demonstration, Ibrahim, spokesperson for the National Coordination of Civil Vigilance, read an official statement amplified by dozens of loudspeakers strategically positioned throughout the square and adjacent streets. The document, the result of a consultation with more than 200 civil society organizations, was presented as the collective voice of the Burkinabe people. "We warn Western powers that any new attempt to destabilize our government will be met with even greater resistance," Ouagadougou said, wearing a traditional robe in the national colors. "The Burkinabe people have chosen their path and will not accept external impositions. The era of coups sponsored by foreign powers is over in Burkina Faso." The statement listed in detail alleged Western interventions in the country's internal affairs, including the assassination of Thomas Sankara in 1987, support for governments deemed subservient to foreign interests, and the recent coup attempt, described as the last desperate act of a decaying imperialist system. As Ouagadougou read out each charge, the crowd responded with chants of "France out" and "Long live Traoré," creating sound waves that echoed off the government buildings adjacent to the square. The document concluded with an appeal to the international community. "We do not ask the world to agree with our political choices. We ask only that it respect our sovereignty, just as we respect that of other countries." The era in which Africans were treated as children incapable of deciding their own destiny is over. The demonstration gained even more momentum when, around midday, a delegation of military leaders from Mali and Niger arrived at the square, demonstrating regional solidarity with Traoré's government. The surprise appearance was interpreted by observers as a clear sign of the formation of a cohesive geopolitical bloc in the Sahel, united by anti-French rhetoric and similar models of governance. Colonel Assimi Goïta, leader of Mali's military junta, was greeted with thunderous applause when he declared, "What is happening in Burkina Faso is not an isolated case. It is part of a continental awakening against decades of exploitation and manipulation. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are at the forefront of a new era for Africa, where our resources will serve our people, not foreign corporations." The presence of Goïta, who rarely makes public appearances outside his country, surprised even Burkinabe government officials, according to diplomatic sources. His decision to attend the event in person, ignoring the security risks, was interpreted as a calculated gesture to demonstrate the unity of the emerging regional bloc. The international repercussions were immediate. In Paris, the Foreign Ministry called an emergency meeting with ambassadors from European Union countries to discuss what an internal document, leaked to the press, described as the irreversible deterioration of French influence in the Sahel. In Brussels, the European Commission issued a statement calling for constructive dialogue and a democratic transition, but stopped short of directly condemning Traoré's government, in a sign of growing division among European countries over how to deal with the region's new military regimes. In Washington, the State Department merely took note of the demonstrations, while senior officials discussed the need for a complete reassessment of U.S. strategy for the Sahel, according to sources familiar with the discussions. Sources at the U.S. State Department, who spoke on condition of anonymity, said the demonstration was monitored with concern by the United States. The Traoré regime's ability to mobilize represents a significant challenge to Western policy in the Sahel region, one of the sources admitted. We are facing a phenomenon that transcends the borders of Burkina Faso, and that has the potential to redefine power relations in West Africa. The source added that intelligence reports sent to the White House in recent weeks had consistently underestimated popular support for Traoré's government. There was a significant miscalculation. We believe the regime was isolated and vulnerable, but today's events paint a completely different picture. Western media coverage of the event varied significantly, reflecting emerging geopolitical divisions. While some outlets, such as the BBC and Deutsche Welle, offered relatively balanced reporting, highlighting the magnitude of the mobilization but also questioning its spontaneity, other outlets, such as Le Monde and the New York Times, emphasized the authoritarian and populist character of the Traoré regime. The contrast was particularly stark when compared with coverage by non-Western media outlets. Al Jazeera devoted a 6-hour special broadcast to the event, with correspondents stationed across the city. Russia's RT broadcaster described the demonstration as a revolution against Western imperialism, while China's CGTN described it as a historic milestone in Africa's quest for economic and political autonomy. French intelligence analysts, quoted by Le Monde newspaper, estimated that the demonstration was the largest anti-French demonstration ever recorded in a former colony. An internal report from the Quai d'Orsay, the headquarters of French diplomacy, called the event a turning point in Franco-African relations and recommended an urgent reassessment of the French strategy for the Sahel. What is most worrying for Paris is not only the scale of the demonstration, but its demographic composition, the report noted. We are not facing a mobilization limited to radicalized young people, but a movement that cuts across generations and social classes, including traditionally moderate sectors of Burkinabe society. As the evening drew to a close, as the demonstration reached its peak, giant screens were set up at strategic points in the square to broadcast a recorded speech by Captain Traoré. The virtual appearance of the leader, who had avoided appearing in person for security reasons, sparked an explosion of enthusiasm among the protesters. Wearing his signature military uniform and speaking directly to the camera, Traoré thanked the people for their support and reaffirmed his commitment to the country's true independence. What you have demonstrated today goes beyond Burkina Faso, he said in the calm but firm voice that has become familiar to Burkinabes. You have sent a message to all of Africa and the world. We will no longer accept being pawns on the chessboard of the great powers. Every attempt to overthrow us only strengthens our determination to build a truly free country. Referring directly to the failed coup attempt, Traoré made a direct accusation. We know who is behind this plot. We know the names, the contacts, the secret meetings in foreign embassies. We have all the evidence. At the appropriate time, the Burkinabe people will know the whole truth. The speech, which lasted about 15 minutes, concluded with a call for national unity and continued vigilance. Our struggle is not over. Those who have plundered our resources for decades will not easily accept our independence. We must remain united and vigilant. True independence has a price, and we are willing to pay it. After the speech, the demonstration took on a more festive character. Local bands took to the main stage, performing patriotic and revolutionary songs. Traditional dance groups performed at various points in the square, while street vendors distributed food and drinks to the crowd. This is a day I will tell my grandchildren about, said Aisha Compare, a 42-year-old teacher who was marching with her 3 children. It's the first time since Sankara's time that I feel truly proud to be a Burkinabe. Finally, we have a leader who doesn't bow down to foreigners. As night fell over Ouagadougou, the crowds gradually began to disperse, but thousands of people remained in the square, lighting bonfires and setting up makeshift camps. The police and army, remarkably discreet throughout the event, kept their presence minimal, limiting themselves to observing from afar. "We don't need force to control our people," explained an army officer who requested anonymity. "We are all on the same side. This is a day of national celebration, not repression." As the stars appeared in the sky over the Burkinabe capital, the echo of revolutionary drums and chants continued to reverberate through the streets. The demonstration was officially over, but its message would continue to resonate far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, signaling a new era in relations between West Africa and its former colonial powers. Ibrahim Traoré's rise to power in September 2022 through a military coup was initially seen as yet another political instability in a country accustomed to military interventions. However, unlike his predecessors, Traoré quickly consolidated his position with an explicitly anti-imperialist and nationalist platform that resonates deeply with the young population, which represents more than 60% of the country's 21 million inhabitants. At just 34 at the time of the coup, Traoré became the world's youngest leader of state. His youth, combined with his military training and his fiery rhetoric against the French presence, created an almost mythological figure among young Burkinabes. The movement led by Traoré touches on historical wounds that have never healed, explains Aminata Diallo, a researcher at the Center for African Studies in Paris. It articulates a discourse that connects the country's current precarious economic situation with decades of colonial and neo-colonial exploitation. Most importantly, it offers a narrative of hope and dignity in a context where the future seemed blocked for most young people. In just 18 months in power, Traoré has implemented a series of radical reforms that have directly challenged Western interests in the region. The expulsion of French troops in January 2023 was just the first step in a broader strategy to break with the structures of economic and military dependence that characterize the country's relations with the West. Official documents from Burkina Faso's foreign ministry, obtained exclusively by our team, reveal that over the past 8 months, the military government has canceled 14 mineral exploration contracts with Western companies, mainly French, and renegotiated them on more favorable terms with partners from Russia and China. This decision has increased state revenue by approximately 340%. According to data from the Central Bank of Burkina Faso. For the first time in our history, we are seeing the benefits of our natural resources being invested in our own development, said Pascal Zager, director of Burkina Faso's newly created Sovereign Wealth Fund. Previously, foreign companies mined our gold and took 85% of the profits. Now that ratio has been reversed. In March of this year, Traoré signed a decree requiring that 60% of the profits from all mining operations remain in the country, in addition to implementing a program of progressive nationalization of natural resources. The immediate economic impact of these measures was felt mainly in France, where the company total saw its shares fall 7.2% after the announcement. Domestically, Traoré's government has used the new resources to finance an ambitious rural development program focused on building basic infrastructure in the country's poorest regions. According to official figures, more than 300 new water wells have been drilled in the past 6 months, and a rural electrification program has reached 78 communities that had never had access to electricity. The economic model implemented by Traoré represents a direct threat to Western interests in the region, said Robert Thibault, an analyst at the consultancy Geopolitical Futures. He is not just a popular leader, but an alternative economic project that, if successful, could inspire other African countries to renegotiate their relations with former colonial powers. The ideological dimension of Traoré's government is equally significant. In a symbolic move that resonated across the continent, the government restored monuments dedicated to Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader assassinated in 1987 with alleged French involvement. Sankara's ideas, which combined economic nationalism, anti-imperialism, and social justice, were resurrected and adapted to the current context. Traoré has achieved something remarkable, reconciling the memory of Sankara with the contemporary aspirations of Burkinabe youth, notes François Misser, Africa correspondent for Le Monde Diplomatique. He does not simply evoke the past, but offers a vision of the future based on national autonomy and dignity. A crucial element of Traoré's strategy has been controlling the narrative through the national media. After the coup, the government implemented a radical overhaul of the state media system, prioritizing content that highlights the successes of the new regime and denounces imperialist maneuvers. Although international press freedom organizations have expressed concern about these measures, internal polls show that the majority of the population supports the new editorial line of the state media. The movement led by Captain Traoré is not confined to the borders of Burkina Faso. In recent months, demonstrations of support have taken place in Mali, Niger, Guinea, and even in countries considered Western allies, such as Senegal and Ivory Coast. African diaspora communities in Europe and the United States have also organized solidarity rallies, transforming Traoré into a global symbol of anti-imperialist resistance. Last week, more than 15,000 people gathered in Bamako, the capital of Mali, for a rally called Sahel Solidarity, where speakers denounced Western hypocrisy and celebrated the new Pan-Africanism represented by the region's military governments. In Niamey, the capital of Niger, a similar demonstration drew around 10,000 people, who burned French flags and demanded the complete withdrawal of Western troops from the country. A confidential report from the French Foreign Ministry, cited by diplomatic sources, points to a worrying wave of anti-French sentiment spreading across the African continent. The document, drawn up by experts from the Direction Générale de la Sécurité Extérieure (DGSE), warns of the risk of a domino effect that could destabilize France's relations with its former colonies. The French strategy for the Sahel is in ruins, admits a senior official at the Quai d'Orsay who requested anonymity. We spent billions of euros and sacrificed French lives on Operation Barkhane, only to see our influence in the region completely collapse in less than 2 years. In Washington, the National Security Council has held 3 emergency meetings in recent weeks to discuss the situation. According to sources close to the White House, there is growing concern about the expansion of Russian influence in the region, facilitated by the anti-Western rhetoric of leaders like Traoré. Leaked documents from one of those meetings, obtained by the Washington Post, reveal that U.S. officials called the situation in the Sahel potentially more destabilizing to American interests in Africa than any development since the end of the Cold War. The issue is not just geopolitical, but also ideological. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Sarah Johnson told a closed session of the Security Council, "We are witnessing the emergence of a new paradigm in African international relations that directly challenges the post-Cold War order." Russia's role in this new geopolitical configuration has been particularly significant. Since Traoré came to power, the Russian presence in Burkina Faso has increased considerably. In December 2023, the first contingent of military instructors from the Wagner Group arrived in Ouagadougou, officially to help combat the jihadist groups that control parts of the national territory. The Russians are offering something the West has never been able to provide: a partnership without political strings attached, explains Ibrahim, a researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in Dakar. They are not demanding democratic reforms or respect for human rights. They are simply offering military and economic support in exchange for access to natural resources and geopolitical influence. In an unprecedented move, representatives of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, and the Central African Republic signed a military and economic cooperation agreement in April, formalizing what some analysts have already called the Sahel Bloc. The agreement envisages the creation of a joint military force and a financial system partially independent of the CFA franc, the currency controlled by the French Treasury. During the signing ceremony, held in Bamako, Captain Traoré delivered a historic speech that was broadcast simultaneously on state television in all 5 countries. Today, we are taking the first step towards the true economic and political independence of the Sahel. We are not breaking with the world. We are simply refusing to continue in a system that keeps us forever as suppliers of raw materials and consumers of manufactured goods. The economic impact of this realignment is already being felt. According to data from Burkina Faso's Chamber of Commerce, trade with Russia has increased by 278% in the past 12 months, while trade with France has fallen by 63%. China has also been expanding its presence in the region, signing contracts to build vital infrastructure, including a railway that will link Ouagadougou to Bamako, bypassing traditional routes that pass through Western-aligned countries. We are witnessing a real reorganization of the economic and political architecture of the Sahel, notes Christine Dugon-Clement, an associate researcher at the University Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne. It is a process that began years ago, but has been drastically accelerated by the recent military coups in the region. The cultural influence of Traoré's movement should not be underestimated either. In recent weeks, songs celebrating Burkinabe resistance have gone viral on African social media, and T-shirts bearing the young captain's image are being sold on the streets of capitals as far afield as Dakar, Johannesburg, and Nairobi. In Paris and other European cities with large African diaspora communities, cultural and political events have been organized to discuss the Traoré phenomenon and its implications for the future of relations between Africa and the West. Some of these events have attracted the attention of European authorities, who are concerned about the possibility of political radicalization among young descendants of African immigrants. The failure of the recent coup attempt against Traoré was a major blow to Western strategies in the region. According to documents leaked to the Africa Intelligence website, Western intelligence agencies were reportedly monitoring the preparations for the coup, although representatives from Paris and Washington vehemently deny any involvement. Details of the failed operation, revealed by the Burkinabe government, point to a sophisticated plan that included infiltrating disaffected elements into the armed forces and establishing contacts with opposition groups in exile. The operation was reportedly coordinated from a base in Ghana, a country that has close relations with the United States and the United Kingdom. The coup attempt followed a classic playbook of Western-sponsored regime change operations, say to compare, Burkina Faso's defense minister said at a news conference 2 days after the operation. What they did not anticipate was the loyalty of our armed forces and the massive support of the population for our government. The Traoré government's response was swift and ruthless. More than 30 military officers were arrested on treason charges, and 3 opposition politicians living in the country were detained for alleged involvement in the plot. The government also expelled the ambassadors of France and the United States, accusing them of activities incompatible with their diplomatic status, a euphemism traditionally used for espionage charges. The fundamental problem is that the West has not yet understood the nature of the movement it is facing, said Mohamed Sanogo, a former government advisor in Burkina Faso and now a visiting professor at the London School of Economics. This is not a simple military coup, but a popular movement with deep social roots. Every attempt to overthrow it only strengthens its legitimacy in the eyes of the population. Traoré's success in foiling the coup attempt has strengthened his position domestically and expanded his regional influence. French and American officials now face a strategic dilemma: continue to push for democratic normalization in Burkina Faso, risking further fueling anti-Western sentiment, or seek accommodation with the new regime. We are at a dead end, acknowledges a European diplomat based in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. Economic sanctions only harm the civilian population and reinforce the anti-imperialist narrative. Military intervention is out of the question in the current political context, and completely ignoring the regime means opening up space for Russia and China. At a press conference in Paris yesterday, French Foreign Minister Philippe Leclerc signaled a possible change of approach. We recognize Burkina Faso's sovereignty and are open to a constructive dialogue based on mutual respect. France is willing to review aspects of its policy towards the region. Analysts interpreted these statements as a tacit acknowledgement of a new geopolitical reality in the Sahel. France is finally realizing that its era of hegemonic influence in the region is over, notes Antoine Glazer, a journalist and author of several books on Franco-African relations. Now Paris will have to compete with Moscow, Beijing, and even Ankara for influence in its former precare backyard. In the United States, the debate over how to deal with the new scenario in the Sahel is dividing the administration. While the State Department advocates a more conciliatory approach, sectors of the Pentagon and the intelligence community warn of the security risks posed by the growing Russian presence in the region. A recent partially declassified U.S. Africa Command AFRICOM report warns that the expansion of Russian influence in the Sahel poses a significant strategic challenge to U.S. interests in the region, particularly with regard to access to critical minerals and the containment of terrorist groups. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré's government is preparing to announce in the coming weeks an ambitious national development plan which, according to sources close to the government, will include significant investments in infrastructure, education, and health, financed mainly by new mineral exploration contracts. The so-called Sankara Plan 2030, named after the assassinated revolutionary leader, calls for the construction of 500 new schools, 200 health centers, and the complete modernization of the country's road network. Independent experts question the financial viability of these goals, but acknowledge that if successful, the plan could radically transform the population's living conditions. The real test for Traoré's movement will come now, concludes Aminata Diallo. He has managed to mobilize popular support on the basis of his anti-imperialist rhetoric, but he will need to translate this into concrete improvements in people's lives to sustain his legitimacy in the long term. African history is littered with revolutionary leaders who initially challenged the West, only to be corrupted by power or overthrown by further external interventions. Next week, a high-level delegation from the Burkinabe government will travel to Moscow and Beijing to discuss new trade and military cooperation agreements, in yet another sign that the country's geopolitical reorientation is far from just rhetoric. According to diplomatic sources, the delegation will present proposals for the construction of a gold refinery in Ouagadougou and the modernization of the international airport, projects that will require significant foreign investment. In parallel, the government announced the creation of a Pan-African university in Bobo Dioulasso, the country's second-largest city, with the stated aim of training a new generation of African leaders committed to the true independence of the continent. The project, which will draw on professors from Cuba, Russia, and China, is seen as a direct challenge to Western-funded educational institutions in the region. What we are witnessing is potentially a turning point in the post-colonial history of West Africa, says Jean-François Bayart, a professor at the Institute of Advanced International and Development Studies in Geneva. For the first time since independence, a bloc of countries is articulating not just a rejection of Western domination, but an alternative vision of development and international integration. As the halls of power in Washington and Paris continue to search for answers to a phenomenon they have so far proven incapable of containing, the streets of Ouagadougou are buzzing with a new sense of historical possibility. As one young protester at the recent mega-demonstration put it, Traoré has given us back something we had lost a long time ago, the pride of being Burkinabe and African. Now, for the first time, we believe that we can determine our own destiny.